Quite possibly one of the biggest lies in media is that voter fraud is near non-existent, when in fact you can easily do a Google search and find a plethora of stories from many of these same outlets about voter fraud. We got some really big stories. How about this one? Dead cat gets voter registration application in the mail. The cat's been dead for 12 years. Owner says her late pet was a demo cat. Haha. Very, very funny. Now, I decided to lead with this because of the sheer absurdity of the story. But we've actually got a more serious story. A mail carrier literally pled guilty to manipulating mail-in ballots. We also have several charges up in Paterson, New Jersey. Trump has cited this, and the media is trying to fact-check him that he's wrong when in fact the story proves him right. Here's the question I have when it comes to voter fraud. What amount of voter fraud would be enough for the media to say, yes, it exists? You know what the answer for me is? One story. If you give me one story saying voter fraud, I say, well, there, by definition of what existence means, we have the existence of voter fraud. So they try to argue, but it's not widespread. Define widespread. Would you demand 10,000 voter fraud stories for you to actually believe there's a problem? Or would 100 be enough? So here's what I did. I've got some breaking news. This mail carrier is pleading guilty. A dead cat is getting a voter registration application in the mail. And this shows us exactly what's going on and the risks we face when we switch to mail-in ballots. The reason why I'm particularly perturbed as it pertains to the story is that I've got a mail-in ballot sitting right here. Now, I personally never received my mail-in ballot for the primary in New Jersey. I did receive an application, but I wasn't given any clear instructions as to what I was supposed to do. However, someone who doesn't live in my home did receive this, so yes, I see problems. And what I think we can expect come November is both sides, Democrat or Republican, are going to have the opportunity to claim voter fraud happened, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's coming. They say, many people say this, no one's going to accept the results of the election anyway, so why does it matter? It's a good question. But I'll tell you this right now, the media would tell you it's not true. How would you like to take a ride with me back in time, 10 years, and I will pull up many wide-ranging instances of low-scale to higher-scale voter fraud. And I'll show you exactly how this plays out. But first, what's going on with the dead cat that received a registration to vote? Bear with me, this story is funny, and then we'll get serious. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. There is a P.O. box if you'd like to send me stuff. But the best thing you can do is share this video and subscribe. If you really like what I do, sharing really does help because I'm competing with many big news outlets and I don't have the big marketing budget they do. But if you just want to watch, then make sure you subscribe, hit the like button and the notification bell. I notice, I got to be honest, man, a lot of people aren't subscribed but are regular viewers, so it really would help if you do subscribe. I would appreciate it. But let's read the news from Fox. Cat gets voter registration application in the mail after dying 12 years ago. Now, I know this story may seem silly, but there is a legitimate reason why I show you this. Third-party organizations send out pre-filled out voter registration application forms to people because they're believing this person might lean a certain way, or they live in a certain area that has a higher density of a certain political party, and they're hoping to increase voter turnout. But this could result in cats getting voter registration, and I'll show you why this is so insidious. I understand a cat can't vote, but what about someone who shouldn't be voting, but who gets the application, fills it out, and then is able to? They say, an Atlanta family said it received a voter registration form this week for their cat, Cody Timms, who died 12 years ago. Quote, there's a huge push, but if they're trying to register cats, I'm not sure who else they're trying to register, the feline's owner, Carol Timms, said. I'm not sure if they're trying to register dogs, mice, snakes. Very clever joke. The Timms say they found the forms addressed to the cat in their mailbox on Wednesday. Carol Timms described Cody as a great cat, indoor and outdoor, who loved his family, loved his neighborhood, and lived to the age of 18. But in terms of his voting prospects, he's a cat and he's been dead for a long time. The Georgia Secretary of State's office told the station that they did not send out the form and that third-party groups behind such applications often use mailing lists to obtain names and addresses of people, and in this case, a cat. Quote, third-party groups all over the country are targeting Georgia to help registration qualified individuals. This group makes you wonder what these out-of-town activists are really doing. Make no mistake about it. This office is dedicated to investigating all types of fraud. Asked how Cody might have voted in the polls if he could, Timms told Fox 5 that he was a Demo-cat. Ha 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 ha. Well, the Secretary of State's office, my understanding is they said, even if the cat was registered and went in to vote, the cat would not be able to because it doesn't have a driver's license. You can see there the importance of voter ID. Let's get serious. I assure you there are many undocumented immigrants who may have received these forms and may not be aware. Worse still, there may be many permanent residents who are not legally allowed to vote who received the form and didn't know they are not allowed to vote. This has happened already. I believe it was in Texas. There was a legal resident of the U.S. who has been here for a very long time. This woman, to my understanding, was quite old. She received some kind of voter registration. She voted and then found out she wasn't allowed, but she didn't realize it. Now, of course, that's an illegal vote. You can't do it. And they held her personally responsible. This is a problem I have with many of these organizations. They don't care what happens to the people who don't know they shouldn't be voting and then go and do it. And some of them may end up in prison. Worse still, it could nullify an election if a certain number of votes are proven to have been fraudulent or illegal. But this brings me now to the more serious story. Evidence of voter fraud, easily discoverable. You want to know what I did? I'll tell you what I did. I went onto Google. I chose a year before the recent elections, and I said voter fraud. And guess what I found? A ridiculous amount of stories about legit voter fraud being uncovered. High-level voter fraud and manipulation. It exists. And let's get serious. A mail carrier. This is breaking news, by the way. A mail carrier took people's absentee ballot requests and switched their party to Republican. Thomas Cooper of West Virginia is facing 8 years in federal prison. Apparently pled guilty. Now, you want to know why this is a big deal? Right off the bat, many states, many jurisdictions have closed primaries. If you took a Democrat and switched their party to Republican, they would not be able to vote in the primary. And who would that hurt? Who would that help? Well, depending on which area this is, who these individuals are, it could help or hurt Bernie or Biden. Here's a story from BuzzFeed News, of all places. A West Virginia mail carrier is facing prison time after admitting he attempted election fraud by changing the party's registration of people who had requested absentee ballots for the state's June primary, officials announced Thursday. Thomas Cooper of Dry Fork signed an agreement in which he pleaded guilty to one count of attempting to defraud the residents of West Virginia of a fair election and one count of injury to the mail. In a May 26 criminal complaint, prosecutors detailed how the clerk of Pendleton County discovered the 2020 primary election mail-in absentee requests appeared to have been altered using a black pen. 5 of the requests had been altered, so the voters' ballot choice was switched from Democrat to Republican. But the clerk knew some of the voters were not Republicans, and when she called them, they told her they had used blue pens to request Democratic ballots before dropping off the requests at the post office. For the other 3, officials said the party wasn't changed, but the requests had been altered. Do you know what the problem here is? First of all, they're going to say it was only 8 people. I get it. Well, hold on. Dude, these are individuals. They're being disenfranchised. That's not fair. But I tell you now the big problem with switching to mail-in ballots. Several people, organizations, high-profile activists have said, many people have said, that the security is the same for mail-in ballots. First of all, it's not. I'm looking at one that should never have arrived to a house where this person doesn't live. But okay, let's entertain that notion. With mail-in ballots versus absentee ballots, you have widespread usage. That means you are maximizing the probability of some kind of fault or failure. If you have 100 absentee ballots out of 100,000, and 1% of those absentee ballots get manipulated, it's a single vote. But what happens when you switch now to 100,000 mail-in ballots? You now have 1,000 votes swinging in a certain direction because they're being manipulated. Not only that, but you increase the amount of people who interact with these ballots, increasing the percentage likelihood of more fraud. Guess what? We uncovered this plot. It was one person doing something dumb, and they switched several ballots. They got caught. And people will say it was only 8. Listen, like the cockroach on the wall, There's probably, for every one you see on the wall, 1,000 more hiding behind it. Don't we want to secure our election process? How could we have gone 4 years of them claiming the Russians are manipulating our election, to the Democrats now saying we should weaken our election security? We know that ballots can be manipulated. We know there is fraud. We have the proof. It's especially bad in Paterson, New Jersey. Shouldn't we demand more security? Why less? Oh, because of COVID, they say. Listen, I'm sorry. If we are not prepared for an emergency like COVID, I do not believe we should be changing our election security and weakening it just because of an emergency. It means next time. It means right now we say there's a problem, but for the sake of a fair election and security, we must change it after the fact. We have 4 years to plan this out. They say when investigators met with Cooper in late April, he admitted to changing some of the ballots. I did it as a joke, he said. Haha, yeah, right. I didn't even know them. Cooper faces up to 8 years in prison, although prosecutors have agreed as part of the plea deal to call for a reduced sentence. Cooper attorney Scott Kernut told BuzzFeed News his client had engaged in a silly lark. He is deeply sorry for the implications for our democratic process. It should be remembered, however, that the mail he altered were requests for ballots, not ballots themselves. Altering their party affiliation can remove them from a primary, mind you. Regardless, it's fraud nonetheless. The applications could have been disqualified. You could make them look fake or bad, or by switching the party, they might say, I don't know which party they actually want. And therein lies the big problem. I'm sorry, however, for those that thought this is a one-off. I've got so much more for you, and you're going to love it. Donald Trump tweeted about Paterson, New Jersey last week. So what did NPR say? Fact check. New Jersey election fraud case draws a Trump tweet, but suggests safeguards are working. It suggests they do sometimes, but it also suggests something absolutely worse. This I find funny because the framing of the story is positive when it should be, in my opinion, negative. But I'll tell you what, read the story, take their positive view, and I'll give the negative one. They say, when President Trump tweeted Sunday night about alleged voter fraud in a May special election in New Jersey, he tried to wrap it into his ongoing effort to claim voting by mail is less secure than in-person voting. It literally is. Absentee ballots are fine. A person has to go through a process to get and use them. Mail-in voting, on the other hand, will lead to the most corrupt election in USA history. Bad things happens with mail-ins. Just look at the special election in Paterson, New Jersey. 19% of ballots a fraud while they were disqualified. I don't know if they were a fraud or not. Some people complained saying they weren't a fraud. But guess what? Here's what they say. Election law experts say that Trump's spotlight on the case also shows both how rare these kinds of cases are and the safeguards in place to protect the integrity of ballots. I am so sick of that opinion. If you find one cockroach, you assume there's 1,000 more, right? Why would we just say we only found one? That proves there's none. You got a cockroach in the wall. Well, there you go. There's your proof. There's one cockroach. No, there's probably a lot more hidden somewhere else. They got to come from somewhere, right? Now, I can't tell you how rampant voter fraud is. It doesn't matter if it's widespread or rare. It matters that it exists. And if Trump won some states by only a few thousand votes and you increase the probability, you see where we're going with this. But mind you, it could go both ways. Both sides could cheat. Now, here's the best part. Here's what they say. In the story, they mention that they rejected about 20% of the votes. But they say the most important part is that the most important part, in my opinion, is this. In fact, there are many more common reasons for a ballot to be thrown out, such as a signature that doesn't match election records, or if the ballot was received after the deadline. It was also the first election in New Jersey conducted entirely vote by mail, and officials have warned of hiccups in matching signatures, processing paper ballots, and receiving the mail on time. Although critics, including Trump, have claimed that a surge in mail-in voting will leave the election system prone to fraud, voting rights advocates in New Jersey say some of the same security features that exist for in-person voting also feature vote by mail. I'm sorry, wait a minute. That is nothing. That's a non sequitur. That does not in any way connect. Let me tell you something. If this was the first vote by mail in New Jersey and 20% got disqualified, that's a false start. How about we realize, whoa, the first one and it was bad? Yikes, man. I can only imagine we're going to have a very, very high rate of failure if that's the case. Or we can at least assume it. Coming out and saying, yes, but there are some of the same security features doesn't change the fact that the first mail-in vote in Jersey had 20% of the votes disqualified. I'm sick and tired of this narrative that voting fraud doesn't exist. It absolutely does. Let's play a game. New York accused of denying too many absentee ballots without fixes just from a couple days ago. It has begun. The lawsuits are already popping up, and this is in New York, a Democratic state with a massive Democratic city, and they are already suing. New York officials were sued for allegedly violating the rights of voters by rejecting mail-in ballots at one of the highest rates in the U.S. without giving voters a chance to address possible irregularities. I am telling you now, we are in for a wild ride. It has only just begun. Less than 4 months out now from one of the most important elections in our history. I think both Democrats and Republicans agree on that, and many other factions agree on this too. I understand there's more than just Democrat and Republican. And we're already seeing this. Voter fraud in New Jersey, voter fraud in West Virginia. New York is denying too many ballots. They're being sued over this. It will be bedlam. I tell you this now. And you think it's going to be election night? No, I'm sorry. It's going to be election month. And what happens if we go beyond the deadline of December 14th? Well, as many leftists, the founder of MSNBC wrote for Newsweek, it will then fall to SCOTUS, who will likely suspend the Electoral College count, give it to the House of Representatives, and then, hey, good news for Donald Trump because the Republicans have the majority of the delegations in the House, meaning Donald Trump wins. End of story. So I can't tell you why Democrats are pulling for this unless they really want Trump to win. But that's the trick. I can give you all the reasons in the world why it seems like Trump is actually doing bad, why he's on track to lose by any normal metric. But all this weird nonsense they're pulling, in my opinion, I just see the irregularities will give Trump the win. You've got the rioting. That's going to push sentiment for Trump. But then you've got the broken election process being pushed by Democrats. They must really want Trump to win. I bring you now on a journey. Woman accused of mailing checked off ballot requests makes court appearance June 17th, just last month. She was accused of causing around 300 rejected ballot requests in Vanderbilt County and has pleaded not guilty. Janet Reed was in court Wednesday morning. Election officials say she mailed out ballot requests to voters with the Democratic Party box already checked off. Very interesting. She doesn't work for the election office. She is charged with unauthorized absentee ballots, a level 6 felony. All right. Evansville, Indiana. But did you think that was it? How about this one? We go back in time to last year. Leslie McCrae Dowless, political operative charged in North Carolina congressional race. This guy, I believe, was a Republican. He was accused of directing workers to collect and mail in other people's absentee ballots during the 2018 Republican congressional primary and the 2016 general election. It's against the law. And there's more. How about we go back to where's the date on this one? This one is Atlanta City Councilman. Let me just read it for you. In Trenton, a state grand jury indicted Atlantic City Councilman Marty Small and 13 members of his failed mayoral campaign Thursday on voter fraud, tampering, and conspiracy charges. So I don't think they have the proper. This is from I don't know when this is from. September 4th, 2009. So we're going back in time. Now you might say it's a local election or it's a city councilman. Sure. But it happens and people get caught. And this is the point. I want to go back in time. So this is the wrong article. I want to go back in time to 2009. Acorn. Acorn charged in voter registration fraud case in Nevada. Las Vegas, May 5th, 2009. A prominent anti-poverty organization that drew criticism from Republicans during last year's presidential race was charged by Nevada officials Monday with engaging in voter registration fraud. 2 former leaders of the group's Nevada branch were also charged in connection with the submission of thousands of bogus voter registration forms. How about that? Why don't we pop over to good old Wikipedia to see what this is all about? You see, Acorn no longer exists, partly due to the work of Project Veritas. You want to talk about real journalism, not these outlets that keep saying voter fraud isn't a real concern. Well, how about you go ask Veritas, who actually uncovered a lot of the weird goings-on of Acorn and have since uncovered a lot of malfeasance at many major corporations. One of the last few real journalism outlets that exist, if you were to ask me. I bring you now to widespread voter fraud over the span of several years. In 2007, in Washington state, in which 7 temporary employees of Acorn were charged with submitting fraudulent voter registrations, Acorn agreed to pay King County $25,000 for its investigative costs and acknowledged that the national organization could be subject to criminal prosecution if fraud occurs again, meaning fraud occurred. According to the prosecutor, the misconduct was done as an easy way to get paid, not as an attempt to influence the outcome of elections. But that doesn't matter, okay? What matters is that it happens, and it happens a lot. I don't care what the intent of these individuals are. For all I know, there's going to be people who are doing voter registration now, sending their registration to dead cats, hoping they get paid. But it will manipulate the election, or at the very least, give either party the opportunity to demand a lawsuit, which results in absolute chaos in this election process. Even though Acorn had been caught in 2007, we go now to 2009. I kid you not. In plea deals, in a 2009 Las Vegas case, former Acorn field director Amy Busefink and Acorn official Christopher Edwards pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit the crime of compensation for registration of voters. And there you go. In connection with a quota system for paid registration staff, Edwards was sentenced to a year's probation and agreed to testify for prosecutors in charges against Acorn and against Busefink, however you pronounce it. Busefink appealed her case to the Nevada Supreme Court, challenging the constitutionality of the statute. In April 2011, Acorn entered a guilty plea to 1 count of felony compensation for registration of voters, for which they were fined $5,000, but did not concede that the law was constitutional. In addition to conducting voter registration drives, Acorn, blah, blah, blah. So there you go. I can show you all of these stories. I got to be honest. I have a bunch of other stories that I pulled up that I didn't actually want to put in here because, to be honest, there's too many. Many of these stories were individual level. An individual filed false forms, tried to vote twice. It happens. Veritas, for instance, recently uncovered a dude who voted twice. Dude got caught. And this guy I think was a Republican. But they'll drag Veritas for being fake news even when they uncover real fraud. You know what the issue is? I think Veritas gets it. One person committing fraud means fraud exists. By all means, you can argue, but it's negligible, sure. But if we are now pushing mail-in voting to a widespread nationwide level, and we have confused voters, disenfranchised voters, I'm sorry, your system is broken. Maine voters, this story from July 8th. Maine voters get mixed messages on mail-in ballot postage. Amid a rapid switch to absentee voting, many Mainers aren't sure how much postage is required to mail in their votes and aren't getting good answers. You see, it's not just about fraud. It's about an 11th hour rule change on how the ballots are processed, resulting in people having no idea how to vote, like me. You can argue fraud, but here's the most important point. I would have happily gone and voted in the primary. I think New Jersey is, I don't know if it's semi-closed, or I don't even know if I would have been able to vote. I think that's why I got an application. I didn't know what I needed to do. I received an application in the mail, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Can I vote in person? I have no idea. It was for an official mail-in ballot. I didn't want to do a mail-in ballot. Admittedly, for me personally, I wasn't too concerned about the primary in the first place. Otherwise, I would have taken more time. But the challenge is I work all the time. I had very little time to investigate, so ultimately I said, I don't know about this, and I kind of just walked away from it. This is the problem. When it came to Election Day, which was just 3 days ago, I tried looking online and the website was down. I had no idea what to do, and I shrugged my shoulders and said, oh, whatever, man. I have too much work. I work double shifts every day. I work weekends. I have no days off. So I'm not going to prioritize, the primary. The general election will be a different story. I'm going to actually dedicate time for that. But I'm sure there were many people who would have loved to have voted, but didn't know what to do and are confused now. This will be rampant come November. We're not just going to hear about fraud. We're going to hear about widespread disenfranchisement or whatever. We're going to hear people complaining, saying, I didn't know how to vote. It's not fair. It is going to be lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. And I am worried there will be no conclusive election. None. Because it may go to the Supreme Court, who shuts it down because of the December 14th deadline. Then it can go to the House. Maybe the House chooses Trump. Maybe they choose Biden. Maybe it becomes deadlocked. Who knows? Maybe the Republicans in the House will vote for Biden. They only need a couple. It might not fall on party lines. Maybe they will defect and say, we don't care. And then Biden wins, even though Trump wins the popular vote, or vice versa. Joe Biden wins the popular vote, has the plurality of votes in the Electoral College. They give it to Trump. We are going to see chaos no matter who wins. No one will buy it. And I'm worried about what that results in. An illegitimate presidency for either, I have no idea. I really, really don't. But I will warn you now, Trump supporters. The Examiner says Trump counting on a silent majority that may never be heard. For a lot of reasons. Yeah. I don't know what to expect. I don't think anyone does. But let me wrap this up by telling you, when they come to you and they say there is no mail-in voter fraud, there's no concern, security is fine, show them this video. And ask them, if you disagree with what this man, me, what I have to say, then please, by all means. They can comment, they can post it and then rebut and counter everything I've said. But what I've said is simple. If there is any voter fraud when it comes to mail-in votes, if the first mail-in vote for New Jersey was broken and corrupt, that suggests, in my opinion, that we will see a lot of voter fraud, and that can swing an election. It will open the door for lawsuits. Everyone will fight. No one will know who won. And then you get chaos. If that's what you want, then so be it. But I think it's obvious that it exists, and I am worried about what that means for the rest of us. But I'll wrap it up there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.